Cedar Creek, Maryland. December 23, 2009. The last thing anyone saw was 11-year-old Emma Lynn Baker curled up on the couch, watching Home Alone with her little sister. Outside, Christmas lights flickered softly against the frost, and beside her bed hung a handmade friendship bracelet. The words, "Best Friends Forever," stitched in bright yarn. By morning, Emma was gone. No screams, no broken glass, just a tilted pillow, a window left half open, and a single blue fiber caught in the frame. For 3 long days, the town searched, through the woods, the fields, every frozen ditch, hoping she'd be home for Christmas. But the snow kept falling, and hope slipped quietly away. Years passed. The case turned cold, until a forgotten drawer in an abandoned house and one small bracelet finally revealed the truth about what really happened that night. Do you still believe small towns are safe? Comment where you're watching from, city and state. I'd love to know how far this story travels. And if you believe every story deserves justice, hit subscribe, tap the notification bell, and help us keep these voices alive, because silence protects no one. Cedar Creek, Maryland, December 23, 2009. A night that began with a warm glow and ended in silence. At the far end of Laurel Grove Road, nestled behind frost-bitten maples and clusters of holly, stood a modest house adorned in strings of Christmas lights. Their twinkle cast soft patterns across the snowy yard, illuminating hand-carved wooden reindeer and a small sled leaning against the porch rail. Inside, the gentle hum of a furnace and the faint scent of cinnamon cookies filled the air, as if the house itself was determined to hold on to every drop of comfort before the coming storm. In the living room, 11-year-old Emma Lynn Baker and her 6-year-old sister Katie huddled together on the couch. Under a patchwork blanket, their eyes sparkled at the antics of Kevin McAllister on the screen, their laughter rising and falling in time with the slapstick chaos of Home Alone. Emma, with her cascade of curly brown hair and a dimpled, eager smile, helped Katie wrap tiny presents in crinkled red paper. Nothing expensive, just tokens of love meant for their aunt and the family cat. Katie, more content to watch than to help, listened as Emma explained how to tie ribbons and tuck away secret notes, her small hands clumsy but earnest. As the movie credits rolled and sleepiness crept in, Emma went to the small bedroom she shared with Katie. On the nightstand, beside a stack of sketchbooks and a plastic snow globe, Emma carefully hung her newest treasure, a friendship bracelet crafted from bright yarn, each letter of "Best Friends Forever" lovingly stitched in her favorite colors. She believed with a child's certainty that such things were powerful, that love and friendship could keep nightmares at bay. Outside, the winter wind howled, rattling the old house and slipping through invisible cracks in the window frames. Emma shivered and tucked herself deeper beneath the covers, listening for the familiar sounds that meant home. Katie's gentle breathing, the purr of their cat curled by her feet, and the distant, reassuring drone of a police scanner from their aunt's bedroom. Rebecca Miller, 32, worked the night shift at Cedar Creek Memorial Hospital, and her absence was just another part of life for the Baker sisters. But Emma felt safe with Katie at her side, and the promise of morning gifts hanging in the air. Hours later, when the world had fallen into its deepest darkness, a chill swept across Emma's cheek. The bedroom window, once latched, now hung open by a sliver, letting in a ribbon of icy air that danced along the edge of her pillow. Emma stirred, half awake, and pulled the blanket tighter, whispering a promise to herself that she would fix it in the morning. But at that moment, Somewhere in the deep silence between midnight and dawn, something shifted. There was no warning, no sudden crash or desperate scream to shatter the peace. Only the soft creak of floorboards, the sigh of wind, and the steady tick of a bedside clock counting down the seconds of ordinary childhood before it vanished forever. By sunrise, the glow of the Christmas lights had faded, replaced by the cold gray of dawn. In Emma's room, one pillow was tilted strangely, its surface undisturbed except for a faint indentation where a head should have lain. The friendship bracelet still hung beside the bed, its colors dulled by shadows and the sharp bite of December air. The house was silent, almost reverent, as if mourning what had been lost in the night. Downstairs, Katie woke slowly, rubbing sleep from her eyes, unaware that the world had changed while she dreamed. She reached for her sister, expecting the same warmth, the same quiet reassurance, but found only emptiness and a chill that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than the window. On Laurel Grove Road, neighbors would later say they remembered nothing unusual, no barking dogs or strange headlights, just the hum of distant carols and the crunch of frost beneath their boots. They had no idea that in the small house glowing at the edge of town, innocence itself had been quietly stolen, leaving only questions and the ache of something missing. What really happened that night would haunt Cedar Creek for years to come. Cedar Creek, Maryland, had always prided itself on being the kind of town where everyone knew your name. The houses were close, the woods thick and forgiving, and the people friendly in a way that made outsiders wonder if it was all an act. But it wasn't. Life here unfolded in quiet routines. Kids rode their bikes down country lanes till the sun dipped behind the trees. Neighbors gathered at the hardware store to swap stories. And Christmas was the brightest season of all. Each home stringing up lights, each family marking the days with a paper advent chain, waiting for that single, magical morning. Emma Baker fit perfectly into this world. She was the sort of child people described as gentle, a little shy, a little dreamy. She preferred colored pencils and the company of her gray tabby, Muffin, to the noise of playground games. Emma could sit for hours by the living room window, sketching the same snow-laden pine over and over, trying to capture the way the light made everything sparkle. Her love for her younger sister, Katie, was fierce and protective, the bond between them growing stronger in the absence of their parents, whose faces were only pictures on the mantel. Katie, at 6, was Emma's opposite in many ways, loud, energetic, always asking why and never sitting still for long. But she adored Emma and followed her everywhere, content to be the shadow in her older sister's world. Katie loved the stray cats behind Delmar Market, the taste of cinnamon toast, and the way Emma could make up bedtime stories that seemed real enough to touch. She was the only witness to that December night, her memories later swirling with confusion and fear. Their aunt, Rebecca Miller, was the anchor that held the little family together. Only 32 but already worn by life, Rebecca had taken the girls in after their parents' accident, trading her own dreams for double shifts at Cedar Creek Memorial Hospital. She wore her exhaustion like a second skin, her hands always moving, her voice low and soothing, her eyes quick to scan for any sign of trouble. She did everything she could to make the girls feel safe, decorating the house with thrift store finds and baking cookies late into the night before her shifts. Rebecca wanted to shield Emma and Katie from every harsh truth, never imagining how impossible that wish would become. There was one other name on people's lips that winter: Thomas Ledger, a tall, broad-shouldered man with calloused hands and the kind of easy smile that earned him free coffee at every diner in town. He was Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, a mechanic at Del Mar Auto Repair, and for a while he'd seemed almost part of the family. He brought the girls little gifts, a set of colored markers for Emma, a stuffed rabbit for Katie, and stayed for dinner when Rebecca was too tired to cook. His presence was a comfort, at least until the breakup, when things soured and he disappeared from their lives without much explanation. No one, least of all Rebecca, wanted to remember him after Emma vanished. As news of Emma's disappearance rippled through Cedar Creek, the entire town seemed to reel as one. Parents clutched their children tighter. Old women peered out from behind lace curtains, searching for movement in the shadows. In church, prayers rose for Emma's safe return, and rumors began to swirl about strangers seen on back roads, about the old, abandoned barn out by Del Mar Pines, about secrets that suddenly seemed possible in the light of so much fear. Still, even as suspicion and dread crept in, most refused to believe that evil could find a home in Cedar Creek. This was a place where the biggest crimes were kids throwing eggs on Halloween, where people left their doors unlocked and their hearts open. But innocence once taken cannot be restored by wishful thinking. That winter, Cedar Creek learned that safety is fragile, and that sometimes the monsters wear the faces you know best. And so the story of Emma Baker, her family, and the small town that loved her began to spread, woven into the very fabric of Cedar Creek. Each thread a question, a memory, or a prayer for the morning that never came. The memory of that night would become a tangle of shadows and half-remembered moments for everyone involved. But for little Katie Baker, the fragments never quite fit together. After midnight, the wind had grown restless, rattling the cracked window and slipping cold fingers across the girls' faces. Katie dreamed of snowmen and the sound of sleigh bells, her sleep deep and undisturbed until the creak of the bedroom door sliced quietly through the darkness. She opened her eyes, not quite awake, squinting at the tall shape filling the doorway. A man stood there, outlined by the faintest glow from the hallway nightlight. He wore a brown jacket zipped to his chin and a knit cap pulled low, shadowing his features. There was a familiar smell, motor oil maybe, or the leather of old work gloves. His voice when he spoke was gentle but urgent, a whisper that slid beneath her drowsiness and made her shiver. "Emma," the man called softly, "your aunt asked me to pick you up. Come on, honey." Katie's mind fluttered somewhere between confusion and trust. The words sounded right. The voice was one she had heard around their house before, lingering at the edges of dinners or carrying from the driveway as he handed Rebecca a bag of groceries. Still, sleep tugged her under again, and she let her eyelids fall. She heard the soft shuffle of feet and the squeak of the floorboard that always made Emma giggle when they played hide and seek. Then, nothing but the hush of winter wind and the regular tick of the clock. In the pale blue light of morning, Katie woke alone. The bed beside her was empty. No warmth, no whispered jokes, no Emma. She blinked and looked around, half expecting to see her sister on the floor, searching for a lost slipper or trying to coax Muffin the cat from under the bed. Instead, there was only silence. And the window on the far wall stood open, letting in a slice of bitter December air that made her pull the covers tighter. Downstairs, the house seemed unchanged. Coffee grounds in the filter, Rebecca's mug in the sink, stockings still dangling from the mantel. Katie padded quietly from room to room, calling her sister's name in a voice that grew smaller with each unanswered echo. Outside, the world was waking up. Neighbors starting cars and scraping windshields, all unaware that a quiet catastrophe had already unfolded at the edge of town. When the police arrived hours later, summoned by Rebecca's panicked 911 call, they moved through the Baker home with measured urgency. They examined the bedroom, noting the perfectly made bed, the tilted pillow, the absence of any sign of struggle. The front door was still locked from the inside. No broken glass, no muddy footprints leading through the house, no trace of forced entry anywhere but the window. It was there, on the chipped wooden frame, that a sharp-eyed officer found the first clue, a muddy boot print pressed into the sill, as if someone had paused for balance before climbing out. Clinging to a splinter of wood was a single blue fiber, almost invisible against the faded paint. Outside, officers walked the perimeter of the property, their breath ghosting in the frigid air. They searched for tracks, for anything that could mark the passage of someone carrying a small, sleeping child into the woods or to a waiting car. But the snow had fallen lightly after midnight, blurring every footprint, masking every sign. Only the boot print and the fiber remained, a silent testimony to a disappearance as precise as it was chilling. Inside, Katie sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide and unblinking. She repeated what she remembered to the officers. A man, a jacket, a soft voice calling Emma's name. Rebecca hovered nearby, torn between comforting her niece and interrogating her, desperate for any detail that might explain how a child could vanish from a locked house in the middle of the night. By the time the afternoon faded and the Christmas lights blinked on again, Cedar Creek had changed. Doors that once stood open were now bolted tight. Parents watched their children with new suspicion, glancing nervously at every stranger and every shadow. The questions would echo for years. How had Emma disappeared so quietly, so completely? Who had come in the night, leaving nothing but a tilted pillow and a thread of blue? Morning in Cedar Creek was usually slow and gentle, sunlight filtering through frosted pines, neighbors waving over coffee, children counting down the hours until Christmas. But that morning, December 24th, was different. Rebecca Miller came home from her night shift at Cedar Creek Memorial, with exhaustion clinging to her bones and holiday lists spinning through her head. She barely noticed the silence as she slipped off her shoes in the entryway. It was only when she opened the girl's bedroom door that dread gripped her heart. Emma's bed was empty, covers undisturbed except for the impression where her head had rested, the pillow angled in a way that made the absence more unbearable. Rebecca's heart thundered in her chest as she called Emma's name again and again, the sound swallowed by the thick hush of the house. She tore through every room, throwing open closets and cabinets, searching for any trace of her niece. Katie, confused and frightened, trailed after her, clutching her own stuffed rabbit and asking why Emma wasn't answering. Rebecca's mind raced. Maybe Emma had gone outside to play. Maybe she was hiding. Maybe this was all a mistake. But each passing second dragged her further from hope and deeper into terror. By 6:30, the frantic search had spilled out onto the front lawn. Rebecca called neighbors, then the police, her voice shaking as she tried to explain the impossible. Officers arrived quickly, their blue uniforms jarring against the backdrop of holiday wreaths and colored lights. The calm rhythm of the neighborhood shattered as squad cars lined the quiet street and officers fanned out across snowy yards. As word spread, the town responded with astonishing speed. Friends, strangers, and local business owners dropped everything and gathered at the Baker home, forming search teams and distributing flashlights and maps. Volunteers moved through the woods, shouting Emma's name into the cold, empty air. They combed every inch of Laurel Grove Road, poked through sheds and unlocked barns, pushed through frozen thickets in the hope of finding a clue. A scarf snagged on a branch, a footprint in the mud, anything at all. By midday, the search had grown into a massive operation. Police dogs sniffed along ditches and fence lines. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping through the winter stillness, searching for any sign of movement beneath the bare trees. A command center sprang up at the firehouse, where anxious volunteers received assignments and taped up missing posters bearing Emma's bright, hopeful smile. Rebecca wandered among them in a daze, answering questions through tears, her hands trembling as she passed out copies of Emma's latest drawing, as if her art might summon her back. The hours stretched, and hope began to fray. Journalists arrived with cameras and notepads, their questions sharp and insistent. Cedar Creek, once invisible to the outside world, now became a headline. Christmas decorations looked garish and wrong, red ribbons flapping in the wind, plastic Santas gazing out over a sea of police tape. Katie clung to Rebecca, her small body rigid with confusion and grief, unable to understand why her sister hadn't come back for breakfast, or why grown-ups whispered so fearfully when they thought she couldn't hear. She answered the detective's questions bravely, her young mind struggling to recall details, the color of the man's jacket, the softness of his voice. Each word added another thread to the web of heartbreak spreading through the town. 3 days passed, each more unbearable than the last. Then, on the afternoon of December 25th, as the sky turned gray and families across Cedar Creek sat down for hollow holiday meals, a volunteer stumbled upon a chilling sight near Delmar Pines. Beneath a blanket of leaves and thin dusting of snow, they found Emma's body, her small frame hidden by earth and tangled branches. On her wrist, dulled by mud, was the friendship bracelet she'd made with such care just nights before. The news swept through Cedar Creek like a winter storm, breaking what little remained of the town's hope. Christmas would never mean the same again. In the hearts of Emma's family, and in the heart of all who searched, only grief remained, sharp and cold, lingering far beyond that dreadful December. Shock settled over Cedar Creek, heavy and suffocating, as detectives converged on the woods where Emma's body had been found. Every parent in town gripped their children a little tighter that night. Rebecca Miller stood outside the morgue, numb, staring into the empty space where her life used to make sense, answering questions she wished she never had to hear. Investigators moved methodically through the family's house, documenting every detail, every item out of place, every surface that might hold a secret. In Emma's bedroom, the blue fiber recovered from the window frame and the muddy boot print became the initial focus. Forensics experts worked late into the night, sifting through Emma's belongings, searching for matching threads, fabrics, anything that could tie the evidence together. They found more blue fibers on Emma's bedsheet and scattered on her pajamas, so fine they might have been invisible to the naked eye. They photographed the boot print on the windowsill, comparing its tread to dozens of shoes collected from neighbors, friends, and relatives who had ever set foot in the house. Then, from the window's wooden frame, they lifted a partial fingerprint. It was small, but clear enough to be entered into their database. The result came back faster than anyone expected. The print matched Thomas Ledger, Rebecca's former boyfriend, The same man who had once sat at their table, fixing Emma's broken bike and laughing with Katie over ice cream. Though Rebecca had ended the relationship months ago and told everyone she'd cut off contact, his presence in the house was no longer just a ghost of the past. Detectives called Ledger in for questioning. He arrived in a faded brown jacket, his face set in the neutral mask of someone who knew how to play the part of the helpful citizen. He insisted he hadn't seen the Baker family for months, claimed he'd moved on with his life, and offered vague answers to their pointed questions. But his alibi was thin and his manner restless, eyes darting to the clock and back to the detectives. Meanwhile, Katie, brave but trembling, recounted again what she remembered. "It was Mr. Tommy," she whispered, her voice quivering. "He came into our room that night." The investigation deepened. Detectives searched Ledger's pickup truck, a battered Chevy with grime caked in every corner. Under the passenger seat, they discovered a torn scrap of blue fabric, a match to the fibers found at the house and on Emma's pajamas. There was more. In the glove compartment, inside a handkerchief, they found a single strand of long brown hair. Testing would later confirm it belonged to Emma. With this evidence, police moved quickly to arrest Thomas Ledger. News of his arrest sent a fresh wave of disbelief and fear through Cedar Creek. Many remembered him as friendly, always ready to lend a hand, never raising suspicion even in hindsight. But for investigators, the case was far from over. Though the fingerprint and fiber evidence painted a damning picture, the DNA results at the time were inconclusive. The technology wasn't perfect, and the partial profiles failed to provide the certainty needed for trial. Winter faded into spring, then summer. The initial surge of energy and hope in the investigation slowed as legal obstacles mounted. Ledger's defense attorney argued the evidence was circumstantial and claimed police had focused too quickly on his client, ignoring other possible suspects. The community, once united in grief, fractured into anxious silence and suspicion. Rebecca, battered by grief and guilt, tried to rebuild a sense of safety for Katie, even as reporters kept calling and the legal process dragged on. Weeks turned into months. The case, which had once seemed so close to resolution, stalled. Emma's memory lingered in the drawings still taped to the refrigerator and in the brittle silence that fell over family dinners. Her bracelet, once a symbol of innocent friendship, became a relic of everything Cedar Creek had lost. Justice, it seemed, would have to wait. As the seasons turned, the ache of loss settled deep into Cedar Creek's bones. The whirlwind of police activity slowed to a crawl. Posters with Emma's face, once bright and urgent, faded in the rain. Neighbors took down their Christmas lights late that year, moving carefully around the space where the Bakers' front yard had become a staging ground for grief. Life returned to a rhythm, but nothing felt right. Rebecca went back to work at the hospital, her eyes shadowed and her words careful. Katie grew quieter, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her world shrunken to the rooms of the house and the footsteps of her aunt. For detectives, the case grew colder with each passing month. Thomas Ledger remained in custody for a while, but his lawyer, citing the lack of conclusive DNA evidence, secured his release pending further investigation. Ledger withdrew from public life, moving out of town and cutting ties with old friends. Rebecca and Katie were placed under police protection for a time, but even that reassurance eventually faded, replaced by the uneasy knowledge that Emma's killer was still out there, somewhere, breathing the same air. By 2012, Emma's file was thick with reports and evidence logs, but thin on answers. Detectives revisited every detail, interviewing old witnesses and chasing down rumors. The blue fiber, the boot print, and the fingerprint all pointed to Leger, but the defense pounced on every inconsistency. Without a definitive DNA match, prosecutors hesitated to risk a trial they might lose. Emma's case was filed away, labeled a cold case, a phrase that hung in the air like a chill no fire could warm. For years, Rebecca lived in a state of suspended animation. She tried to keep life steady for Katie: school, homework, dinner at the kitchen table. But every birthday and holiday carried the ache of absence, and every ordinary night was haunted by what-ifs. Sometimes she would find Katie awake long past bedtime, staring at the window as if she expected her sister to climb back in and whisper that everything was just a bad dream. Hope arrived in 2015 not as a miracle but as an envelope. The Maryland State Police Cold Case Unit took over Emma's file, determined to give her family the answers they deserved. Advances in forensic technology brought a wave of possibility. Analysts in white lab coats re-examined every scrap of evidence: the blue fiber, the fingerprint, the hair found in Leger's truck. They worked with newer, more sensitive equipment, running the DNA profiles again and again. The breakthrough came quietly. A full genetic match, undeniable, conclusive, was made between Thomas Leger and the hair recovered from his truck's handkerchief, as well as fibers from Emma's pajamas and the blue fabric. The evidence was finally enough to break the stalemate. With this new information, detectives secured a search warrant for Leger's former residence, which had long stood empty on the edge of Delmar. Inside, everything was dust and silence. But in a forgotten drawer, hidden beneath old receipts and junk mail, they discovered Emma's friendship bracelet, the one she had hung beside her bed that last night. Its colors dulled but unmistakable. The discovery sent ripples through the cold case unit. For Rebecca and Katie, it was a bitter form of relief. The truth had been waiting all along, buried beneath years of dust and denial. The case files grew thicker, but this time, hope edged into every page. The memory of Emma's smile returned, not only as a source of pain, but as a promise that justice would not be denied forever. In Cedar Creek, news spread in quiet conversations and candlelit vigils. The monster that haunted the town's nightmares finally had a name that no one could ignore. Yet even as a sense of closure began to form, everyone knew the scars would last. For some wounds, there is no full healing. Only the knowledge that the story, at last, might reach an ending. With the new forensic evidence in hand and the discovery of Emma's friendship bracelet in Leger's abandoned home, the cold case team pressed forward, reopening wounds across Cedar Creek that had only just begun to scab over. The truth, long buried beneath the weight of silence and suspicion, started to surface in bits and fragments. But nothing prepared Rebecca, or the town, for the revelations that came next. During a late-night interview with detectives, Rebecca finally confessed to a secret she had carried alone for years. It was a confession born not of guilt, but of shame and fear, a truth she had tried to keep hidden even from herself. Months before Emma's disappearance, Rebecca had ended her relationship with Thomas Leger. On the surface, it had seemed like an ordinary breakup: arguments over money, long hours, the strain of raising two young girls alone. But the real reason was darker, more troubling. Rebecca had caught Leger lingering in the hallway outside the girls' bedroom one evening, making excuses about looking for his jacket. She had felt an unease in his presence around the children, a shift in his tone and attention that sent icy prickles down her spine. At first, she doubted her instincts, not wanting to believe the worst about a man she'd once trusted. But the uneasy feeling grew, fed by small incidents. The way Leger's gaze lingered on Emma, the gifts he brought for the girls, the way he inserted himself into their lives, always just a bit too eager to help. Rebecca confronted him quietly, asked him to leave, and when he protested, she put her foot down. The relationship ended abruptly. She told no one, not wanting to cause a scene, not wanting to dredge up rumors that might stain her family or terrify the girls. This private dread became a burden she carried in silence. In the aftermath of Emma's disappearance, the guilt gnawed at Rebecca. Had she acted soon enough? Should she have warned others? Should she have gone to the police with her suspicions, no matter how uncertain they felt? The fear that she had missed her chance to protect her nieces haunted her, a shadow behind every sleepless night. As detectives pieced together Leger's history, a troubling pattern emerged. He was no stranger to police, though his record was full of minor offenses, petty theft, public drunkenness, nothing that marked him as a monster. But the cold case unit dug deeper, finding that he had never been far from the lives of vulnerable children, always orbiting families like Rebecca's, always present but never fully trusted. The realization chilled the town. The man they had welcomed at church picnics, who had fixed neighbors' cars for free, was the same man who had shattered their peace. Word spread quickly through Cedar Creek. Parents gathered in small clusters at playgrounds and school parking lots, comparing notes, reviewing every encounter they'd had with Leger. Conversations turned to anxious warnings. A sense of communal betrayal swept through the town. People felt exposed, foolish for having trusted so easily. It wasn't just Emma's family who suffered. The entire community reeled, struggling to reconcile the familiar face with the horror of his crime. The twist reverberated far beyond Cedar Creek. Local officials urged residents to check the state's sex offender registry, a step that many had never considered necessary in their quiet, insular world. Old friendships were scrutinized, boundaries were redrawn, and trust, once given freely, became a precious and fragile thing. For Rebecca, the confession was both a wound and a balm. She would always carry the pain of not having acted sooner, but she also understood, finally, that Leger's evil was not hers to bear. He alone was responsible for what happened that winter. The most important thing now was truth. Painful, cleansing, and necessary. Cedar Creek would never be the same. But perhaps, in the light of the truth, the community could begin to heal. The final pieces of the puzzle, long elusive and shrouded in doubt, began to fall into place with the force of inevitability. Armed with new forensic evidence, the friendship bracelet, and Rebecca's heartbreaking confession, investigators moved quickly. In 2017, Thomas Leger was formally charged with kidnapping and murder. The news echoed through Cedar Creek, shaking the town with a blend of relief and sorrow, as if the collective breath that had been held for years could finally be released, though it came out as a sob rather than a sigh. The trial, though anticipated with dread, became the most closely watched event in the county's memory. Reporters gathered daily on the courthouse steps, their breath forming clouds in the early morning chill, their pens poised to document every revelation and tearful testimony. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, a weight carried on every shoulder, especially Rebecca's. She sat quietly, fingers twisting the sleeve of her sweater, her eyes fixed on the man who had brought such darkness to her family. To avoid the death penalty, Leger entered a plea deal, confessing to his crimes in a voice stripped of bravado. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed like a closing door. There would be no more appeals, no chance for Leger to slip through cracks in the system. For the first time in nearly a decade, Emma's family and the town of Cedar Creek tasted something close to justice. At the sentencing, Rebecca faced Ledger across the crowded courtroom. Her words were simple, but they cut through the silence with a force that left the room trembling. "You didn't just take her life," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "You took the trust of an entire community." That moment lingered in the hearts of all who witnessed it, an acknowledgement of a wound that would never fully heal, but would no longer fester in the dark. In the days following the verdict, the town began to mourn together, their private grief woven into a shared tapestry. On the evening of Emma's birthday, neighbors gathered in front of Rebecca's house, each person holding a candle, the soft golden light flickering against the winter cold. The old house at the end of Laurel Grove Road, once marked by silence and sorrow, became a place of remembrance. The porch, where Emma had waited for her aunt to come home, glowed with a single lantern, its light steady, a symbol of the hope that no child would ever again be lost without a trace. Every Christmas since, Rebecca places the lantern on the porch. It is a ritual both painful and necessary, a beacon for Emma and for every child whose story ended before it should have. The lantern's glow draws neighbors and strangers alike, a silent promise that what happened to Emma will not be forgotten. Each year, the crowd grows. Children press close to their parents, candles flicker in trembling hands, and old men nod with solemn approval. The ache of loss remains, but it is tempered now by the resolve to protect, to remember, and to speak out. For Cedar Creek, justice did not mean the end of fear, nor did it restore what was lost. But it gave the town the courage to face the truth, to change, and to watch over its children with new vigilance. Rebecca, though changed by sorrow, emerged as an advocate, speaking at schools and community meetings, urging others to pay attention, to listen to their instincts, to never be afraid to ask questions. Her courage became the town's compass, guiding Cedar Creek through the long shadows of tragedy toward a future where silence would never again protect the guilty. As the years passed and the pain dulled into a permanent scar, the story of Emma Baker's disappearance and the search for justice outgrew Cedar Creek, echoing far beyond the snowbound roads of Maryland's eastern shore. The loss was so personal, so local, yet the questions, fears, and hopes it awakened found resonance in communities across America. This wasn't just a tragedy. It became a warning, a lesson, and eventually a catalyst for change. The details of Emma's case felt almost too familiar to those who followed the news. It drew national attention when reporters uncovered that the story was inspired by a real event from Salisbury, Maryland, in December 2009. 11-year-old Sarah Haley Foxwell was taken from her home, snatched from the very bed where she should have been safe, just as Emma had been. For 3 agonizing days, her family, neighbors, and strangers searched the frozen woods, their hope fading with each hour. The case gripped the region, the media amplifying the sense of dread that had already settled over every parent who watched the nightly news. When Sarah's body was found, the pain of her loss was matched only by the community's outrage. It soon became clear that her abductor, Thomas J. Leggs, Jr., was not a faceless predator from the shadows, but someone close, someone the family once trusted. Leggs was a registered sex offender and family acquaintance, a man who had slipped through the cracks of a system meant to protect children like Sarah and Emma. The betrayal was not just personal, it was institutional. The question, how could this happen, and who else might be at risk, demanded an answer. In the wake of the trial and the life sentence handed down to legs, Maryland legislators and advocates pushed for reform. Sarah's Law was born from the ashes of tragedy. It aimed to strengthen monitoring of convicted sex offenders, close loopholes that allowed predators to remain hidden in plain sight, and require families to be notified when offenders moved into their neighborhoods. The law's passage was not just a victory for one family, but a step forward for every child in the state, a small measure of comfort drawn from the depths of loss. Emma Baker's story, though fictionalized, carried the same urgency, the same plea for vigilance and action. In classrooms and at town meetings, her name was spoken as a reminder of how quickly safety can be stolen, how fragile innocence is in a world where evil sometimes wears a familiar face. Rebecca Miller, Emma's aunt, became a voice for change, telling her story again and again so that no other family would suffer in silence. Parents, teachers, and law enforcement officers listened. They learned. They acted. Communities across the country began to rethink what it meant to protect their children. No longer was it enough to trust without question, to assume that home meant safety, or that a friendly neighbor could never harbor darkness. Background checks were tightened. Laws were updated. Most importantly, people spoke out. Silence, once seen as politeness or denial, was revealed for what it truly was, a shield for those who would do harm. Through the heartbreak and the years of waiting, Emma's story and Sarah's real-life tragedy brought about a kind of justice that extended far beyond a single verdict or sentence. Their memories became shields for other children, their names woven into the laws and routines that would save countless lives. It was not the justice anyone would have chosen, but it was the only justice left to give. In the quiet that followed the courtroom's final gavel, Cedar Creek found itself changed in ways no one could have predicted. Emma Baker's name, once just a child's scrawl on homework and birthday cards, became something larger, a symbol, a promise, a lesson written into the heart of every family for miles around. Her memory lingered in the most ordinary places: the classroom where her desk sat empty, the swing at the park that moved only when the wind was strong, the seat by the window where she had sketched snowflakes and wished for Christmas to last forever. Rebecca Miller, carrying both sorrow and responsibility, became the steward of Emma's legacy. She learned to speak openly about her fears and regrets, sharing Emma's story at PTA meetings, school assemblies, and church gatherings. Her voice was sometimes shaky, but it never failed to reach its audience. Never assume children are safe just because they're home, she would remind them. Her words soft but urgent. Always verify who has access to them, even if you trust them, even if they're family. She urged parents to listen to their instincts and to their children, to never ignore that inner warning when something felt wrong. The town, once defined by its open doors and easy trust, found a new way to come together, one that acknowledged both the risk and the resilience of a community scarred by tragedy. Parents took a second look at after-school plans and checked the backgrounds of neighbors and babysitters. Teachers paid closer attention to the quiet children, the ones who sat at the edge of every group, and made sure that they had someone to talk to. Even strangers, meeting for the first time at the grocery store or waiting in line at the post office, shared knowing glances, united by the unspoken promise that they would watch out for one another's children as if they were their own. And still, every December, the lantern on Rebecca's porch cast its warm glow over Laurel Grove Road. Its light stretched out into the dark, a vigil for Emma and every child who never made it home. People came from across the county, some bringing candles, others simply standing in silence, bearing witness. For a moment, the cold was held at bay by the glow of remembrance, a reminder that while the wounds might never heal, the story would never fade into silence. This story, though rooted in fiction, was inspired by real events. It stands as both a tribute and a warning. Evil does not always look like a stranger. Sometimes it hides behind a smile, in the familiar cadence of a neighbor's voice, in the outstretched hand of someone you thought you knew. But justice, though it may take years, though it may seem impossible, can be found through courage, persistence, and the unwavering love of those left behind. To the families whose lives were shattered, words offer little comfort. But their courage has sparked change, turning grief into action, pain into protection for others. Laws have shifted, awareness has grown, and in every household that now takes a moment to lock the door, to ask the hard questions, to listen carefully to a child's fears, Emma's legacy lives on. For those listening, for every parent, teacher, and neighbor, let this be more than a story. Let it be a call to vigilance and compassion. Report anything suspicious immediately. Never stay silent when something feels wrong. Speak up, even when it is uncomfortable. Protecting children is a responsibility that belongs to everyone. Some wounds can only be healed by truth. If you believe that every child deserves justice, don't let these stories be forgotten. Share them. Talk about them. Keep their memories alive, not just for the sake of the past, but for the hope of a safer future. Because silence, more than anything else, protects no one.